Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. It's Wednesday, January the 17th. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every couple of weeks. It should be a very interesting show. We're starting off talking about Sightsee, and our guest is Steve Gray, who is one of the people putting together the Sightsee Summit. A lot of people have heard about the Sightsee Summit. It's going to happen on
Friday, January 26th and Saturday, January 27th here in Victoria at the First Metropolitan United Church downtown.
So Friday the 25th and Saturday the 26th. 26th and 27th?
Correct.
Okay, whatever it is, it's that weekend. And you have a website which is going to be showing up under your name?
Yeah, we do sightseesummit.ca, and people can get information about the summit there. Why we're putting it on, some correspondence with the Premier just setting us up, and then the agenda and opportunity to pre-register, which we're asking people to do. People should pre-register? Yes, that helps us get the numbers of who's coming and prepare the meals and make sure we're in good shape with childcare and billeting if people need billeting in Victoria.
It's a huge undertaking to put something like this together in a really short period of time on a really important issue, so I certainly commend all of you who are doing it.
Well, thank you.
There is a charge, but we have to pay, unfortunately, to make these things happen. How many people do you think will be there?
Well, right now we've got, I think, 208 people registered this morning, and we're just talking this afternoon about how many people we should accommodate. The church can hold, the space can hold 350 people to 600 people, but because we're having a meal on Friday and a meal on Saturday, we need to just sort out our logistics in that way. We'll probably cap it in the 300 range.
Okay. Unfortunately, by the time this airs, it will may be very, very difficult to get it, but it's going to be live streamed.
Yes, we're live streaming it. There's a YouTube channel on the website, and we'll have that ready to go on the day. We're starting off the press conference with the West Moberly and Prophet River First Nations, who want to. They're coming to Victoria from Peace River Valley to return 3 yellow stakes, which were purchased, one on behalf of the Premier, and others were purchased by Lana Popham and George Heyman. So they want to come down and return those stakes and return the $100 each that they received. I don't think it's an issue of shaming, but more one of saying, we now find ourselves on the other side of the court case. So you guys had joined us to help pay the cost or defer the cost in our court case against the government, and now you're actually on the other side of the court case, so property will return the money and the yellow stakes that they bought. The yellow stakes were being sold as part of a fundraising effort, as I say, to assist Nunwandi, the West Moberly First Nations and Prophet River First Nations in their fight in the courts against the government to stop the Sightsee Dam.
So the 3 were for John Horgan, Lana Popham, and George Heyman?
Correct.
Yeah. Maybe just for a moment do you want to change to a bit to what can we do when our governments constantly betray us, or am I putting it too strongly? Or is the whole thing a sham from the beginning? The NDP was never really opposed to Sightsee, which is what I think. They were just playing the role of somebody has to be opposed to it or people are going to vote somewhere else. So they control the NDP as much as they control the Liberals. And now we're finding out. Or am I way off base with that?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, that someone might call that a cynic's point of view, but I think what's troubling for many of us who are involved in this issue, we're deeply dismayed by the decision made by the government, and that is in relation to the commitments made by the various individuals in the NDP and the Green Party before the election and during the election. And people like Adrian Dix, who wrote 3 or 4 articles in the Tyee condemning the Sightsee project because of the cost, the lack of, we don't need the energy, encroaching on First Nations land, and the plan to flood this very sensitive ecosystem, all the farmland that would be lost. So
George Heyman used to be the head of the Sierra Club.
Yeah,
You almost have to laugh when you say it. Now he's the Minister of the Environment.
I mean, I'd be hard on the issues, but not hard on the people.
I have nothing against any of them. It just shows what a farce it all is, I think.
Yeah, for me, I might say that I think people were looking at it honestly and with some integrity. They weighed and measured the situation, and the NDP took the position that this was not a good idea, but it should go before the BC Utilities Commission, the regulator, for an opinion. And some people said, oh, that's not reasonable. And the Green Party, they took a different position. They said, no, we'll just cancel the thing if we were to take power. I think the notion of a proper review was a good one. It had been reviewed previously by the Utilities Commission in the 80s and said this is not a sensible project. And but the NDP were saying, as I understood it, saying, well, good government has experts look at these things, people who know about the topic and would properly take a look at it. So we saw with the Harper government federally, sort of damaging the environmental assessments that were going on. And the NDP, from my perspective, took the position that we ought to make those robust reviews. And so they said, let's send it to the Utilities Commission for a proper review by the regulator. Seemed reasonable enough. What was troubling, though, they spoke against it from the information we had available to us. Then they said, if it's an unfavorable report by the Utilities Commission, we'll end the project. And I think the surprise came to us is when there was an unfavorable report from the Commission, there was no decision coming. And that was kind of shocking. Well, what's going on? We were wondering what was happening. When they finally made their decision to continue the dam, that seemed a betrayal to many people. And then that leads to the question that you're raising, which is, well, was this all a done deal beforehand? And I reflect back on the situation, I think, gee, that's a tough question. I mean, that's a hard one. When the government was formed and they looked at things, they left the leadership largely in place at BC Hydro. They didn't stop work on the site. There were a lot of words by the previous government and Hydro about the number of people employed. We had people flying over the site and looking and trying to count and seeing the parking lot was empty at a certain point, that snow was on the ground, there was no tracks on the ground, there's no machines moving. Still the number of 2,500 workers, and we were urging the government to review those numbers and tell us how many people were actually working on site. That never happened.
This is asking the NDP to review the
when they were in government, yeah. Then we've written letters, we spoke to ministers, I spoke to the Premier personally about that issue. He said, yes, we need the job numbers, but how about sharing them so we would all understand? And that's kind of the issue for me, was the transparency in the decision making. Not like we would make the decision. Jack, it's not going to be you and I are going to decide, but the decision makers could share with us information about the process and the considerations that we're on. When you look at the terms of reference that they gave the Utilities Commission, they kept it quite narrow to the economic things. They could have added First Nations impact on agricultural land, the biodiversity, but they narrowed it down. So that was another sign of
one thing
curiosity,
that never gets mentioned in this is the fact that there is going to be a huge greenhouse gas hit from Sightsee.
Yes, and that's, again, a troubling thing. Before the election, the NDP were quite clear that this was not clean energy. This is not a green project. Now they're in government, and after the decision's made, we hear the Premier, before making his trip to Asia, talking about Sightsee being a clean energy source. It's not, and we know well that it's not. However, there are many people who are taken in by the rhetoric. And
the media never tells us the truth.
Well, I guess different people, the alternative media has been quite strong on this. And,
when I say the media, I'm sorry, I mean TV, radio, the big boys and girls.
So, but it is troubling to see the decision being made, and then eventually the government had the experts into cabinet, and we are aware of what a number of those people said in cabinet. That was part of the agreement going in, that they would be able to share with us what they said, not the discussion that occurred or how things went from there. But we know that the evidence presented to cabinet was starkly different from what the Premier said he based his decision on December 11th to continue the project. And yet you'd have imagined that if they've been sitting in the cabinet room and these experts are telling them this is a bad idea.
Exactly what you've said for years, John. It's a bad idea. You were right.
Yeah, and the bureaucrats are saying, or Hydro or whoever's there is saying, no, it's a good idea. You think they have instructed Hydro and the bureaucrats to go and speak to those people outside of cabinet and just get it straight and come back. Never happened. Nobody ever called these people to say, well, let's sort it out. Let's come back and go back to cabinet with a better view, or a more distinct view.
So we can see how deep the problem goes within our society, and somehow we have to deal with it. You wanted to talk a bit about what's happening at Sightsee now.
Yeah, well, since the decision was made, and the Premier made some commitments to the public on the day of the announcement, and that included, for example, that there be an oversight committee to make sure that this was managed properly, that the project would now be on budget. In other words, it wouldn't exceed the excessive spending that's already gone on. And almost right away, the first contract that's been let, we understand, has been let with a corporate entity that the last contract I had with BC Hydro was not able, the company was not able to complete the project, and BC Hydro had to take it over. That sounds like the same old management we had before, not very sound. The Peace Valley Landowners Association, lawyer Rob Botterill put out a release several days ago, press release, to explain that they've had a look at that very same contract. I think was budgeted at I may not have the numbers right, 1.22 billion, and they became aware of one of the bids at almost double that. So the question is, well, what's the final? Are we already over the 10.7? Are we already now moving into the further overruns? And so the Peace Valley landowners have asked to see the bids, make them public, make them transparent. Let's understand early on what's going on. And now one of the firms being involved is now being taken over, or at least looks like will be taken over by a Chinese government corporate entity. And so suddenly we're in this now with the Chinese government in terms of the ownership of who's moving ahead to build the dam, making it more and more difficult to
and under
the
these
project.
International trade agreements, it may be who owns the water as well.
We don't know where that's going, but it's raising a lot of alarms for people, and there's a hope that the federal government will stop the sale of that company for the very reasons that you state, the concerns about what it means under the trade agreements.
Boy, the trade agreements are a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, have you heard that the TPP is almost going ahead?
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. Trudeau it came very close to being signed. I don't know what's happening, but it's not dead. The United States has pulled out of it, but Canada not. But that's a different story. We have 1 minute left. How would you like to finish off? The summit will be happening a few days from the first showing of this program, but
yeah, I guess what we're hoping to do is clarify exactly what led to this decision by the government. We think it odd that what we heard was we can't afford to spend the $4 billion. We can't afford to pay back the $4 billion on the project, so we're going to borrow another $8 or $10 billion, and our grandchildren will need to pay it off. It just doesn't make any sense. So if we get some clarity about that by kind of a process of discovery and sorting that through, that would be good.
Is anybody from the government coming?
No, the Premier's turned down the invitation. We have, of course, encouraged cabinet ministers to come as well, or asked that they come, and invited, if he would like to send some of his staff, some of the bureaucrats who were involved in the decision, but so far silence. We've also asked for information on exactly the data from which they made the decision. They've not provided that either.
Steve, we're going to have to let it go there. So the summit is on the 26th and 27th?
Correct, here in Victoria.
Okay. And live streamed. Check out their website. Thank you very much for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back. This is segment 2. It's January the 17th, and we're going to be talking about proportional representation, something I think is very important. Our guest is Fernando Garcia Crespo, and you are with Fair Vote Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got a lot of stuff to get through, so
Of course we do.
what is proportional representation?
Well, proportional representation is this principle that our legislatures, the share of the legislatures in the House or in the Legislative Assembly should reflect the vote of the people. That means that if a party gets 40% of the vote, they get 40% of the seats. If a party gets 20% of the vote, they get 20% of the seats. The way I see it is, imagine you have a family of 5 kids and you're gonna eat dinner 5 days of the week in a trip. And 3 out of the 5 family members say they want to eat pizza, and 2 out of the 5 family members say they want to eat sushi. In a first past the post system, they would eat those 5 days pizza because the plurality, the biggest share, wins. Whereas in a proportional representation, you would see a share of the choices being reflected in the actions that the legislature, so in this case, a common family action takes. It's a more collaborative system, whereas what we have right now is called the single member plurality, commonly known as first past the post. And what happens is if I vote for a member of the legislative assembly and I vote for the winning candidate, then perfect, my vote counts. But if I vote for anyone who isn't the winning candidate, my vote gets wasted. And one must think, well, generally the winning candidate will get more than 50% of the vote. And that does happen in places like the States or other countries that have two-party systems. In this case, we can get parties winning a seat with less than 40% of the vote and getting 100% of the representation in the Legislative Assembly for that seat. So there is this disparity between what the people actually want and what we get in politics. And this system that we have had is 400 years, more than 400 years old. It's a system that needs to be reinvented, and that other countries have done it before. And there's various ways of achieving it, but the principle is clear. It's about having the will of the people reflected, and about having parties that get 40% of the vote actually needing to collaborate with other parties. So if I get 40% of the seats, I need to get another party with 15% of the seats or with 20% of the seats to help me out. So I will sit down, if I'm the party leader of the largest party, and try to find common ground. That doesn't really happen in a first past the post system unless we have particular examples like in British Columbia. You end up having one party getting 40% of the vote, getting the majority of the seats, and doing as they wish without needing to listen to the opposition.
I agree. To me, I support proportional representation because I think it's more democratic. And
Yes.
whoever wins and whoever forms the government, I don't care. But under a proportional system, I think we, the people of British Columbia or of Canada, will get something closer to the governments we want. As one small example of what Fernando was saying, in the last federal election, I think, it took about 40,000 voters, 40,000 Liberal voters to elect one member of Parliament in the last federal election, 40,000. But it took 600,000 Green voters to elect Elizabeth May, one. So that's about 15 times the value. If you can see how the small parties get badly hurt, and the voters don't get fairly represented.
And not only that, we end up getting elections like 1996 in British Columbia, where the biggest party wasn't even the one to form a government. The Liberals won a larger share of the vote than the NDP, and the NDP won a slim majority. And that wouldn't happen in first past the post. We wouldn't have Justin Trudeau with 40% of the votes, 55% of the seats, and 100% of the power. Whatever party, whatever government exists, it doesn't matter if it's one side or the other. What matters is that we're able to listen to each other, and we're able to really represent and reflect the values of British Columbians in this case, or of Canadians in the country as a whole.
You wanted to talk about the impacts of proportional representation on politics and societies and the way decisions are made.
Well, I don't know how long it has been since you walked into a high school classroom, but I personally am still in high school. And I have been to the Legislative Assembly to watch question period. And the way politicians act is, I would say, a little bit less respect for one another than if you walk into a high school classroom. And I don't think I need to explain why that is a bad thing, but it's an understandable thing. If I sit in opposition for 16 years and I'm unable to pass any meaningful legislation, because even though my party gets 40% or 30% of the vote within 30 and 40 consistently, I am unable to pass legislation, I will get angry. Because we are humans. If we work hard and we are honest and we do the right thing, we should be able to get things done. But under this system, we get parties like the NDP getting pretty big shares of the vote and not being able to pass anything. So this toxic climate of one side against the other, of this sword length of the aisle being a sword length, and one side opposing the other, is something that is deeply embedded in first past the post. With a proportional system, we wouldn't have that kind of things, because we would have coalition governments, and we would have minority governments, and we would have more collaboration. And I think the moment I hear teachers saying, I'm unwilling to take my students to the Legislative Assembly anymore because of the behavior they see, that is something that we need to deeply reflect back into how our government works and into what we're showing the kids to be the values. So one of the effects that it would have immediately is one party being unable to just be completely opposed to the values of the other party just because it's the opposition. We see this idea that one side will oppose the other regardless of what they choose, just because they're the opposite party and the opposite major party. We need to move beyond that. And a way we move beyond that is with proportional representation. We have places like Germany, the two major parties form coalitions together, and everyone gets heard in government, because whenever there's a new election coming up, we have a period of talking between the leaders, of actually reaching meaningful debate. Right now in the House, meaningful debate generally is not something we see, because everything is chosen by the caucus behind closed doors, and the actual place where the debate should happen, it isn't happening.
No. That's right, Parliament becomes nothing.
Parliament becomes nothing, and this needs to change. People need to be able to see this collaboration and this sometimes opposition between one party and another.
So we're coming up to the beginning, I guess, almost of the referendum campaign.
Yes.
Because next, is it November?
It is. We are unsure when the question will be asked. We will learn later on the spring.
But we are going to vote sometime around next November.
That is the most likely thing.
Okay.
Yes.
And the question that we're asked is important, and the way it's asked
Yes,
is important.
exactly.
And who's getting a message out is also very important.
Well, right now we're starting to see the no and the yes side starting to act on their values and starting to move forward. What we can expect is this fear mongering from one side, and this idea that we can reach a common consensus and a new idea from the other side. I think that there are reasons, and there are many of them, most of them, there have a legitimate truth behind them for why this change is important to see carefully and to debate and have a meaningful decision and have a referendum and collaborate with each other. But there's also this idea that the North won't be heard, and that is untrue.
Yeah, now this is something we're not hearing down here.
No.
But the Liberals and the media, I think, are pushing a message up north that, and trying to pit us against each other,
Exactly.
which is always what they do. And the reason I think, the real opposition to proportional representation, I think, is corporate Canada. Because right now they control our governments completely, and PR is more democratic, I think. Therefore, why would our rulers want us to have proportional representation when it actually gives us more power? And they'll fight it, they will do anything. So we're seeing the media and
Yes.
the Liberal Party, the leader, I believe every leadership candidate is opposed, even though the membership of the Liberal Party is 50-50.
Well, yeah, 40-60.
Okay, 40-60 which way?
The majority of them oppose it,
Okay,
but it's
40% support it.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's because of this idea and that the North will stop being heard, and it's actually completely the other way around. If we take a look at Vancouver, places in Vancouver go for the NDP, and some places, more affluent places, go for the Liberals, and we get voices of Vancouver from the left and from the right. We get, in general, most of them being NDP since the past election, where 70% of urban urban electoral districts were won by the NDP. In rural areas, we get places where kilometers and kilometers you would need to travel to find a member of the opposite party. And where we get this loss of representation because people, particularly in many places, First Nations and some other groups, that are drowned in a sea of voters with a different intention than them. So we actually would put more power to rural places. It would become a more representative place. We would get voices from the Peace region right now, giving us a message of maybe within the NDP, a different message than we're hearing right now on issues like Sightsee. And we would be having different voices from each side. We're hearing this very polarized debate because the majority of rural electoral districts are Liberal. And the majority of urban, over 70%, are NDP. So we hear, it is generally seen everywhere that the left is more left in urban ridings, and the right is more right in rural ridings. So we're hearing the most polarized Liberals and the most polarized NDP. So when we hear both sides, it might seem like the province is deeply divided, when in reality we're not. So this idea that the Liberals are trying to sell is to say we are deeply divided. We are insufferably different. We are not one province. There's a north, and there's the urban area, and we're one side against the other, and that is wrong, because we are.
It's a vicious message to
we
put
are
out.
one province, and we are wanting to reach a place where every single region in the province has a voice in government. Because if we get PR, Vancouver Islanders would have Liberals in government if they form government. Where in reality, the last time around, why would the Liberals focus on Vancouver Island if they only get 2 seats there? It is a political nonsense to say we're going to focus our projects and our money and our resources on a place that doesn't vote for us. The same way can happen if a party is deeply urban. They won't worry about the rural voices. Why? Because they don't vote for them. But if we have voices in government from every side of the issue, and we can get better representation, particularly for Vancouver Island Liberals, like it shouldn't be happening that if I live in Victoria, I need to travel hours north to get to the closest.
No, you're absolutely right. PR better represents what people want. I know a little bit about PR, and I don't see how it could possibly hurt the North. And it bothers me that the people who oppose PR are going to use a message of division in order to destroy something that is more democratic. And Fernando, we're out of time. It's a long-term issue. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Welcome back. This is Citizens Forum, and this is the Walt and Jack segment of the show, and we like to bring in a few topics and hash a few things out. So what have you brought in today, Jack?
Well, the first topic for me is bright lights, and I'm just noticing that the car lights are getting so bright now that it's getting crazy. I mean, I really wonder why all of our leadership, I mean, does this bother nobody else that, you know, sometimes it's bike lights are even worse. It just seems like such a simple thing, but even that, there's no rules, no regulations. The car companies can do whatever they want. Yeah, put on the light that's 20 times as bright. Wahaha.
Well, the LED technology, Jack, is getting into cars, and the lights are brighter.
There's a place where there's a crosswalk. When you push the button, the lights are blinding. Like if you're walking up and somebody hits the button, it's like they're trying to make us crazy. I'm embarrassed to push the button, so I don't push the button, right? And then people in the cars, well, why don't you push the button? So again, you know, anyways, that's bright lights. Please, is there anybody in government who can look into this and maybe have some regulations so the lights aren't as crazy as they seem to be getting to be?
When you're driving, there's a lot of glare, especially in the wet winter weather. And as we all get a little older, we're not as good, can't see as well at night. So it is an issue, and throwing more light at something sometimes has the opposite effect that you intend, because your eyes will actually see less because of the glare. Anyway, I brought it. I inadvertently started looking at a couple of issues a few nights ago, and I inadvertently wrote a couple of articles. They'll be published on powertothepeople.ca, and it stemmed from a couple of things. Number one, I was looking at an article that was in the Times Colonist about how the CRD has decided they're not going to burn sludge at the Heartland landfill, and because they said that the technology that they were going to use was unproven and things of that nature. But it's kind of struck me. I remember that was an issue one time about incinerating sludge, and so I looked into it a little bit, and I realized that basically they wanted to the plant that they're building at McLaughlin Point was very undersized for what they really needed. And but through whatever reasons they decided they had to build this small, undersized plant at McLaughlin Point. The issue was that as soon as it opens up, according to their own engineers, it's going to be overwhelmed. It's going to be working at a higher capacity than it's designed for. And the only way for the plant to work was that they were going to have to add chemicals to the process.
To speed up the process. So
Speed
they
up the
can move stuff
process.
through.
Now-
Now, not always, but sometimes.
Well, actually, no. The plant is going to be undersized, and according to their own designers. And I've asked some questions out to some of the directors and things, but I haven't had any replies. But the thing is, we have a problem here now, Jack, that we never had before. They're adding adding chemicals. Now the sludge that they're producing at the plants are going to have toxic chemicals in them. Well, because of the toxic chemicals, you cannot incinerate that sludge. It's not safe to incinerate it. So to me, that was the real reason why they're not going to be burning sludge at the Heartland landfill. Now, the other big problem is that when you're not going to be incinerating the sludge, you're going to have to store it. So now they're going to be stockpiling toxic waste at our landfill. And of course, we know Heartland landfill is right at the top of our watershed.
And there's a lot of toxic waste already stored.
There's
there.
lots
Oh.
up there, but they're adding a lot more.
So what you just said in that last sentence, it's at the top of our watershed.
Yeah.
So it's going to be filtering down through the
Well,
watershed.
they say
over
they're
the
going to
next-
contain it, and there's going to be all those wonderful things. But what struck me about
I don't think so.
this whole story is that it was a strange announcement that they made at a strange time, and I think they're really trying to cover their behinds on this one. I think they know they undersized that plant, and they shouldn't have done that. Politics forced it into McLaughlin Point for whatever reasons they had that were never fully explained. And they ended up with an undersized plant, and now we have toxic sludge.
So what we've done, what the CRD leadership has done to us, is given us a $1 billion financial disaster for this area to do something that, I mean, for me, the environment is number one, that is going to be bad for the environment. I mean, it's bad to throw it all into the ocean, and we could do a lot better. But the scientists seem to be saying that it wasn't that bad a mess out there.
Yeah.
Now we're bringing it all onto the land, and the cost in total to the environment is going to be worse. The cost to the ocean will still be high.
Yeah, well,
We're spending
they
$1
weren't
billion.
adding chemicals. We're not adding chemicals now, Jack. This is new. This is a new problem. You have to realize that. And also, they're adding other processes at that plant that could put microplastics into the ocean with their filtration system. Again, adding a new problem to what we already had. Now, the thing is about this frustration is that the CRD is unelected. The CRD basically is a self-appointed board. The mayors pick apparently it's supposed to be the most qualified councillors, but they just pick their friends that all view the issues the same way as they do. They sit on this board and they make these terrible decisions, and we can't do anything about it. We can't. The CRD is not elected, and we just have to take it, I guess. So when you're talking
That's
about
true for
proportional
all our
representation,
governments,
think about how many miles we are away from proportional representation with the CRD,
It's a
and we
nightmare.
see the results of it. And that's the sad part of it.
Yeah, the cost to our city in so many ways from all levels of government is a nightmare. I just wanted to talk about Canada's housing policy, and of course our city governments, provincial governments, and federal government all play a role in our housing policy. So if you want to know what our housing policy is, just take a look around you.
Yeah.
Homelessness, high rents, and high house prices, a huge amount of debt. And I don't think any of this is necessarily by accident. I think this has been Canada's housing policy for the last 15 to 20 years to get us into this disaster. People have made fortunes from it, and it looks like they're getting ready to bring it down. The impact on our nation will be tremendous, and they're going to make fortunes on the way down once again. And that's where we are, and we have got to do better.
And that's housing as a commodity, a marketable commodity, and not housing as a thing for a roof over people's heads and all that.
New Zealand has said non-residents cannot buy. Oregon has already said, no, we don't believe in that. You wanted to talk about another example of the nightmarish situation in our political world.
Well, hopefully I'll have this article ready too. And this is the John Nuttall, Amanda Corody trial that we had a case here a couple of years ago. It began back in 2013, but basically the
bombing of the legislature.
The bombing of the legislature. But the thing is that in the trial, in the transcripts, and in the judge's decision, the evidence is so damning against the RCMP, and we might want to read a couple of quotes.
You want to
out
read
of this.
some? Okay, but before you start, the reason we're doing this is the Trudeau government is now appealing the judge's decision to free John Nuttall and Amanda Corody because they were entrapped by the RCMP. And this is what the judge said, and now the government is appealing that decision.
Now, it's online, and there's 750 points in the ruling, but in the judgment. But I just pulled off some of the highlights, and it was just amazing what the judge had said.
And this is Justice
Catherine
Bruce.
Catherine Bruce, that's correct. Anyway, item 671. This was not a situation in which the police were attempting to disrupt an ongoing criminal enterprise. Rather, the offenses committed by the defendants were brought about by the police and would never have occurred without their involvement. By any measure, this was a clear case of police manufactured crime. And I'll just read another couple for you. The actions of the police went far beyond presenting the defendants with any opportunity to commit an act of terrorism. The police engaged in a multifaceted and systematic manipulation of the defendants to induce them into committing a terrorist offense. And I'll just read one more for you, because there was all this concern about coercion and all that. The judge said, any reasonable person would have concluded that the members of such a terrorist organization, that this is their RCMP handler, was pretending to be from Al-Qaeda, that the defendants were so convinced that Officer A and his associates were part of Al-Qaeda that they came to fear the officers would kill them if they did not complete the terrorist plan that was orchestrated by the police. So we could go on and on about this, but the thing that's happened, as you said, is that the Trudeau government can't live with that decision. The RCMP are the agents of the federal government, and they have a long and inglorious history about doing a lot of nasty things. But here we have them now appealing this decision, and we should be concerned as citizens. How are they going to appeal this decision? How is it possible that they could find new evidence? There's nothing that exists. So we're very worried. I'm very worried that something's going to happen that's not going to be completely honest. And these two folks were coerced and bullied into playing a small role. The judge said they only played a small role in the crime.
Threatened.
They were threatened to do that. And how safe is anyone in this country when you have our police officers pulling this sort of stunts? I mean,
and you know what? Our premier, John Horgan, my MLA is the MLA for the area where the bombing, the RCMP bombing took place. They should be saying what you're saying. You know, where are our NDP leadership? Because they know as well as we know that this whole story is completely and totally a phony pack of lies.
Yeah.
Right? It was done by the RCMP, according to the judge. Never would have happened without them. And then it was used by the corporate media to divide Canadians and create hatred and anger against Muslim Canadians, which is what the media is trying to do. You can see it constantly. It never
That's
ends.
correct.
And we are the targets. We are all the targets. The Muslim community is being hit the hardest, but we're all the targets because they want fear and division. It's how our rulers rule us.
You know, it's a startling document. You can read it online. I'm going to read her last statement because this is when she put a stay of proceedings in. She said, "There are no remedies less drastic than a stay of proceedings that will address the abuse of this process. The specter of the defendants serving a life sentence for a crime that the police manufactured by exploiting their vulnerabilities, by instilling fear that they would be killed if they backed out, and by quashing all doubts they had in religious justifications for the crime, is offensive to our concept of fundamental justice. Simply put, the world has enough terrorists. We do not need the police to create more out of marginalized people who have neither capacity nor sufficient motivation to do it themselves."
And now the Trudeau government is aiming to put them away. It just shows how deep the rot is within our country. And the media, you know, there was one day of coverage. Well, we'll see how the media covers it, because this case is an insult and a disgrace to the whole country.
We're going to continue to follow it. Anyway, that completes this segment of the Citizens Forum. Welcome back, and we have with us today Will Smith, and Will's he's our director and editor here on the show, and you often see him behind the cameras doing his stuff. But Will has a few things on his mind today, and we're going to be talking about corporate behavior and corporate investing, and also we're going to be talking about something that's sort of related to what we're talking about with the Nuttall case, and what Will and others are calling gaslighting, and showing how public opinion and our views are being manipulated by others. So welcome to the show, Will.
Thanks, Walt.
So okay, let's start out with talking about maybe some of that good news that
Yeah,
you're
this
gonna
is.
bring us.
I don't know if you remember what the last time I was on the show, I was talking about how we can change the way our corporations do things, but we have the power, but we don't have the will. So the reason I say that is because in every corporate charter it says the purpose of the corporation is to increase the value to the shareholders. Well, on Sunday,
That's their only mandate.
that's there's no you should do this and you should do that and you should be a good citizen. It's just increase the value to the shareholders, and then we kind of depend on the courts to make sure justice and the environment's okay and everything else.
Yeah.
But on Sunday, the New York Times published an article announcing that BlackRock, which is one of the largest investment companies, they managed $6 trillion in pensions, and they sent the president of the company, Lawrence Fink, he was the founder and chief executive officer, sent out a letter to the world's largest public companies. And as the article says, this is going to cause this is a big deal. This could be a sea change for the capitalist world, because he's saying that social responsibility must be more important than it currently is. He said, companies need to do more than make profits. They need to contribute to society as well if they want to receive the support of BlackRock. And since they manage $6 trillion, that's a significant amount of money. So corporations are presumably going to listen to this. So he says, society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. So, and he also said that many governments are failing to prepare for the future on issues ranging from retirement and infrastructure to automation and worker retraining. So as a result, society increasingly is turning to the private sector and asking that companies respond to broader societal challenges. So this is good news. I'm hoping it's a sea change because people pay attention to things like this, you know.
Well, my first reaction is, and I agree, you're not going to change corporate behavior just by wishing that they would be better, because we've been trying that for the last 150 years. But to me, in a strategy, as a corporate strategy, it's good because saying that you're going to take in these other values are going to reflect well on you, and this would bring you more customers perhaps, and more profits. So I can't see how they can really lose on that policy. However, the cynical way to look at it, but on the other hand, is that maybe it is possible that they're seeing that the corporations are going to have to have more social responsibility.
Well, we'll see what happens, but it's good news. So the next thing I wanted to talk about sort of keys in on what you were talking about earlier on this RCMP case. It applies to a lot of things, but I was reading some articles on what's called gaslighting, and I know you're familiar with the term because we had a conversation before the show. And the gaslighting comes from I think it came originally from a play and then a movie where in the old days when we had gas lighting in our houses, if somebody turned on the gas in another room, all the other lights would dim slightly. And this guy drives his wife crazy by lying to her continuously and pretending that there's nobody else in the house, but then going around and doing this as if there's somebody else in the house.
So he's playing with her head a little bit.
So he's playing with her head, and this thing is that this drives you crazy. And it's called gaslighting because it's a recognized thing that you have to take care of. I mean, this is something that will give you symptoms of PTSD, low self-esteem, depression, and you know, a lot of the people I meet here we're fighting against this stuff, and people are depressed because nothing's happened.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, let's look up and see if there isn't some kind of a way to apply this politically. And before I start reading this, I just want to say that the thing is that you have to remember that this is not, it's not against individuals. It's against the way the system runs.
Yeah.
But if we just keep doing things the way we're doing, then we're going to drive ourselves crazy. And the thing in particular that I wanted to talk about is the RCMP case, because I mean it looks so obvious to me that we've got something isn't right here.
Well, they're inventing a reality.
They're inventing their own reality. They've invented a reality.
And they have the weight of the government and the corporate media to bring that manufactured reality forward. And others that may spend a little time trying to figure the issue out come up with the real facts. But there's nothing, the facts are entirely different than the manufactured reality.
Exactly. So the question is, how, as an individual, do I keep my own mental health during a time when this is being done to me? It's just as if I'm spending my time in an abusive relationship with somebody and I can't even see what's happening. So here are the things that you have to do. You have to remain defiant, and you have to recognize that there never will be accountability. There never is going to be accountability from the government. And you can let go of the wish for things to be different, and you can develop a healthy detachment. Now, this is difficult because we're all in this system. It's not something that's over there. It's something that we all participate in, this participatory democracy. But I'm going to read these things. I've changed the wording from the original article, which appeared in The Guardian, and this is directly applicable to politics. So I've just changed the wording so that you can see that it's the government that we're talking about. Defiance is key. I trust my version of reality, not the government's. I do not allow it to be altered on demand. Resistance. Anger protects me because I know what I know. It can't be erased. Being defiant does not make me difficult. It makes me resilient. Then recognize that there never will be accountability. The government which is gaslighting me will never be able to see my point of view or take responsibility for their actions. They will never get it. They will never say, oh, you're right. You have a point. They're just going to run over me. So I have to protect myself from that. Let go of the wish for things to be different. The wish for things to be different is very powerful and inoculates us against the tumult. It allows us to continue to believe logic and reason will prevail eventually. We want to believe that the government will change. We want things to make sense, but they won't. I want to feel that I'm on safe ground. I have to let go of this wish because things will never make sense and I will never be heard. Then the last point is developing a healthy detachment. I have to develop certain coping mechanisms. I have to become hyper-vigilant about clarity. There's no room for misunderstanding. Detaching from the gaslighting does not mean total detachment. It just means distinguishing between the world of the gaslighting government and the real world. So I think that those are key points that we all have to do. We all have to still exist, but we all have to realize that this bus is headed off the cliff. So we have to do something about it for ourselves.
And the driver
to keep ourselves healthy.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, let's just look at this RCMP case. Now, the Crown has reinstated, or has
They're appealing the decision.
right. They're appealing the decision, but here's what is written in the case, and this is about the whole summary of the case. This bare summary does not capture the true nature of the police conduct because it was the day-to-day dealings with the defendants who were recorded and videotaped that demonstrate the absurd character of the undercover investigation. It's like we are in Alice in Wonderland. It's absurd. When Mr. Nuttall broke down after the failed train plan and confessed that he was not a general and could not be expected to create a workable plan, Officer A assured him that he would be taken through to the end, one baby step at a time. This is truly a case where the RCMP manufactured the crime. This is not a situation where the police simply, quote, instigated, originated, or brought about the offense. The police took two people who held terrorist beliefs but no apparent capacity or means to plan, act on, or carry through with their religiously motivated objectives, and they counseled, directed, urged, instructed, and molded them into people who could, with significant and continuous supervision and direction by the police, play a small role in a terrorist offense. So their role was relatively small. The police were doing everything.
That's right.
Now, I can't believe that police sit there and really want to do this, because these people are going to jail for life if the Crown, and I'm not saying that they're not innocent, but certainly there's a huge involvement of the police. The police completely orchestrated it.
Well,
So
you
what
could
am I
say the
supposed to
judge
do
who
with that?
wrote
What,
those words.
what am I supposed to do with that as an individual?
Uh-huh.
How does that make me feel about justice here? And what? I don't know. I mean, so I have to go over these points again. I have to let go of these things
Well,
and say,
when you think of it, well, though, the justice herself, the Chief Justice herself, is not going to be allowed the RCMP and the corporate media to gaslight her. She
hasn't.
She's seeing the reality of the situation, and she's very clear. Nevertheless, the RCMP and the government are going to persist with their line. They have nothing else to going for them. They have to continue to vid an alternate reality, and they're trying to hope that enough people will buy in, will buy into their story. And I think it's important. I think there's a relationship here that we should be looking at, is that we, as citizens, should refuse to be gaslighted. We just simply say, no, we know what our facts are, and we're staying with them.
Yeah, the thing for me, Walt, is if let's just say I had a really good friend, like let's just say that you, for example, all of a sudden you cheated me out of several $1,000s. I would never trust you again. I would always be worried about you that might happen again. And I wonder, what are people thinking in the justice system? How can we look at them the same way when the people within the justice? This isn't somebody who's writing a letter to the editor. This is a judge who's saying that this is a complete absurd fabrication. This
is what the hearings showed. I mean, the evidence backs up what she's saying, and there's no reason to doubt the facts as they stand. And this is what's so important. I think that our viewers should remember. Everybody should remember. Don't buy into these stories that were being told about terrorism, for instance. They just don't hold together, and they do create confusion in the public. people don't know what to think. And I think in the end, when people are confused, they don't take action. I think that's where
You're frozen.
yeah, you don't know what the heck is going on, so you can't take a position. Perhaps you don't know how to place your vote in an election. Perhaps you don't know you can't make lifestyle decisions because you really don't know what is the truth anymore.
Right. You don't know what is the truth. And these are people that we depend on just as for our basic, I don't know, I'm still trying to deal with this, but to feel like you're in Alice in Wonderland is really strange.
Yeah, and it's very hard on people. I know we want to live our lives, or be with our families, and why are we going to have to be so troubled? But the thing is, we know these things are going on, and our governments are doing nasty things to us. So anyway, on that sad note, and we're going to try not to be gaslighted anymore. I think it's an important thing. So thanks a lot for coming in, Will. It's an interesting
It's
topic.
my pleasure.
And that wraps up the show for this week.